So I'm going to give you a small taste before we get into our conversation so you see what we're all on about. 3 months after their sudden arrival, the Templetons held a fete. They placed ads in the local paper. Flyers appeared stuck to the outside of shop windows early one morning. One of the children had been involved, the shopkeeper's guest. Most of the leaflets were glued at child's eye level. All the neighbours within a 50-kilometre radius of the old house found leaflets pushed under their doors as well, Nina included. Everyone insisted they hadn't heard anyone come to the door, that the dogs hadn't even barked. One child at Tom's school, overhearing his mother talking about the silent overnight leaflet drop, decided there were supernatural elements at work. The Templetons were ghosts, he announced, living in a haunted house. He did a great job convincing nearly all of his classmates of the fact. It didn't seem to matter what any of the parents said after that. The Templetons weren't just odd, weren't just foreign, weren't just mad to attempt to renovate the old house. They were also creatures from the underworld. Well, it turns out they're not really creatures from the underworld. But first of all, I'd like you to join with me in welcoming Monica McInerney. So, ladies and gentlemen, imagine yourself in Monica McInerney's position. She is Australia's #1 best-selling female novelist. Her last 7 books have been bestsellers. And this one was a little bit longer in the preparation than the rest of them. I'm thinking a couple of thousand readers around the world sending you emails saying, where is it? No pressure? No pressure? Did you feel in any way people waiting for this book?
I hoped that they were. I mean, that's what kept me going, because I would have hated to think that people had forgotten about me, that, 3 years between the books. But I have to say, when I'm writing a book, I don't think about what's going to happen at the end, because I think if I did, I would get too nervous, or I'd start to worry about reviews, or fret about cover images and things like that. And what I love the best about the whole writing process is those months of feeling like you've got this most wonderful secret in your head, which is what it's like to write a book. When it's all you and your imagination, and in fact nobody else in the world has read the story, only you. And I really treasure, that's about a year of the writing process for me. And so I actually don't even think about the outside world. It's me ambling around the streets of Dublin, talking to myself, thinking about plots and characters and locations, and then doing some research. And that's a really private time for me. And when I'm putting everything I can into the book, into the story, and it's actually only when it's getting close to deadline that I start to think, okay, this is going to go beyond. It's going to stop being my special secret, and get it to a wider audience. And that really works for me, because I have to have the most fun with it first, I think, before it can turn into a book.
And again, this gorgeous book at Home With The Templetons is again focused on families, which is something of a preoccupation with yours. Why do you think you're so fascinated by family dynamics? Completely
fascinated. I actually would give a really honest answer to this, but my sister and my niece are here who have put a halt to my gallop, so if they could be dragged out and I can tell the truth about this. I think this is my 8th book, and actually, whenever I say that, it reminds me of this funny thing. Fiona O'Loughlin, the very funny comic, said that she's a mother of 5, and she always says that herself and her husband are going to keep having kids till they get one they like. And that's not why I keep writing. I'm kind of fond of them all. But I used to think, no, I'm not using my own family at all. I'm not using the fact that I'm a middle kid of 7 and grew up in this kind of cauldron of words. And now I realise that was a complete lie. Everything I do in my books comes from the fact that I'm from a big family. And it was a family that was a family house full of conversation, full of drama, because anywhere, you have 2 people in a room, there'll be drama. So you have 9 people in a house. It's like a drama soap opera, really, but lots of comedy as well. And my strongest memory as a child is just the chat in the house, like constant kind of dialogue going on, and doors opening and shutting. It was kind of like a British farce. Like, one door would open, somebody would come in shouting about something, then they'd go out through another door, and you'd never know what was going to happen. And we had a very squeaky gate, so if the doors weren't banging inside the house, the gate's squeaking back and forth. And one of my favourite memories as a child is lying in bed and hearing the chat coming in from the kitchen, and Mum and Dad, there were always lots of people at our house, apart from, I would have thought 7 of us were enough, but no, they brought everybody else in as well, and lying there and hearing conversations back and forth, and trying to imagine who was talking and what was going on. And even now, writing the dialogue is my favourite part of writing my books. And I hear those voices when I'm writing them in the same way as if I'm still that kid eavesdropping.
And I can understand that entirely, because the dialogue is so entrancing, and there's such a lot of it, and you can hear everyone speaking. But especially I wanted to say how much I loved the voice of the young Gracie. I mean, she was so... Gracie is actually the main character, really, and the book follows her from a young age to her 20s, and actually might have even been 30-ish.
No, you're 20s,
late 20s.
Toni's terrified I'm going to test her, like what happens on page 435.
But not only is she a very unusual child, but she's not quirky, annoying. She's totally believable. But every sentence, even if it didn't said Gracie at the end, you would absolutely know it was her. I mean, how did you find that voice?
Oh, that's great to hear that. Thank you very much. She actually arrived fully formed. I probably should, for those of you who haven't got the background to the story, does anybody read the blurb, or would I explain quickly what the book's about? Hands up who'd like me to explain what the book's about.
I possibly should have asked that. I possibly should have asked that earlier.
It's the story of a family called the Templetons who arrive out of the blue. They're an English family. They've inherited a stately home in the Goldfields of Victoria. And quite out of the blue, they turn up, and they're very kind of eccentric family. And they decide to open this stately home, which is called Templeton Hall, and run it as a tourist attraction based on what life was like in the 1850s, 60s gold rush. So they open it to the public every Saturday and Sunday, and they're all dressed in gold rush era clothing. And that was my original idea for the novel, that I would, basically follow this peculiar family and their antics within this stately home in the Goldfields. But as I was writing it, I kept hearing this other voice, and it was the voice of a neighbour, from a very different family setup. The Templetons are mother and father, 3 daughters, and Gracie's the youngest daughter, and a son called Spencer, who's very wild, and the mother's alcoholic sister. And their neighbours are a woman called Nina Donovan and her young son, Tom. And that's when the story really took off for me, that there were this voice of the neighbour that I kept hearing, and I realised that the arrival of a family like the Templetons into a country area would cause such chat in the local town, but also how would it affect a very, very different family who lived just nearby. And that's what the story is all about. It's about 2 very, very different families coming into each other's orbit through the children, not the adults, and it's the good and bad consequences of that relationship, really. So I normally write, I write family comedy dramas, but usually just with one family. And whereas this one, I realised 2 families, it's like, double the comedy, double the drama.
Double the families for the price of one book.
It's buy one, get one free, I think it's called.
And it also opens up a whole new world of interactions, because not only do you have the dynamics within each of the families, you have how that family appears on the outside from someone else's perspective. And that's a very interesting theme in the book, is that what families appear on the outside is not necessarily what they're like on the inside.
Completely. I think, and it's often actually only at the end of the writing process that you realise what the book's about. I keep having to stop myself because I've read both of Toni's books and I love them both, and I want to ask her questions, and seemingly I'm not allowed to. But that's when I write as a storyteller for a start. When I talk about walking around with this imagination life and secret in my head of the story. It's all about, for me, making the most entertaining story I can, and then you take a step back and go, oh, this is what I'm actually exploring. And it was very much that, the idea of everybody thinking that everybody else has got, a better life, a perfect life, a much more grounded life. And the idea of these 2 very, very different families, like the Templetons, appear very wealthy, appear to be, creative and a bit bohemian and have this kind of exciting life. And Nina and her son have a quieter life and a harder life. But each has got something that the other family needs, and it's kind of a magnetic pull between them. And it, with damage coming. Because every family, there's secrets in every family, thank God, or I would have no books to write about.
Monica would be out of a job, so keep making secrets, everybody.
And actually at the start of those Faraday Girls, my last novel, I was just starting to write it, and I found in a book of proverbs and quotes, etc. And it was a Chinese quote, and it said, "No family can hang out the sign, nothing the matter here." And I reckon I could put that in the front of all of my books, actually. I could call one of my books that, because that's the situation, that every family you dig away a little bit, and there's dramas in it. And with this one, what I wanted to do, to return to your question about Gracie, the youngest daughter, I wanted to see it through her eyes, really. She's the most innocent and most earnest of all the family, and so I don't, she's possibly an unreliable narrator because of that, because she's got, as I said, she's got this kind of earnestness and wants the best out of things. So she's aware of this disintegration happening around her, but I'm hoping that as by the time it gets to that, as a reader, you just want it to work out for her, and she'll take you through the rest of the story.
Yes, definitely. So you have this fascinating family, and the Templetons. Next door you have the Donovans, and equally, maybe not quite as interesting, but very deep thoughts there. And then you have poor little Gracie, who is in a way the most responsible out of everyone, including the adults, and you quite feel the weight on her of all these shenanigans going on around her.
I think so, because she's the bridge between the two families, and she's the one that runs across the three paddocks. The Templeton Hall is just outside Castlemaine in the Goldfields, and I really enjoyed writing it, the landscape of it. It was funny to be sitting in Dublin and it was snowing outside, and my head was completely in the Goldfields, and I could smell the warm earth and the gum leaves, and picturing Gracie running across the paddocks between the two houses, because her own house is so chaotic that she craves the silence and the attention that she gets in the other house, and by return, Nina Donovan's son Tom wants a bit of the excitement that happens in the other house. And so the book's a lot about jealousy and wishing that you had what you don't have as well, I think, in terms of your family life and your personal life.
I'm also intrigued that you decided to set the book in Castlemaine, because when you look at a lot of your other work, the Faraday Girls was set in Tasmania, where you lived. You've written other books set in the Clare Valley, where you grew up. Do you have a hidden history with Castlemaine you haven't told us about?
Yeah. In a previous life, I was a gold miner. I just loved it. I just really, really loved it. I actually lived in Melbourne for 5 years and used to take day trips up and go gold panning in Sovereign Hill. And when I had the idea for the book would be set in a stately home, because Templeton Hall in the book itself is almost a character, I reckon, of so much happens, and a lot revolves around what the members of both families feel about their time in Templeton Hall. So I wanted to set it somewhere that it would happen that people would come to it as a tourist attraction, but they wouldn't necessarily. There had to be other things going on nearby, and so I thought the Goldfields are perfect, because people will come, for all the reasons that they were, to Sovereign Hill. Sovereign Hill gets a mention too. So it was just a matter of, actually, my husband and I came out to Australia last year in April and May and spent a fantastic 10 days, like location scouts for a film, driving around the Goldfields. So
you actually had to find the setting so you could run that in your head?
Completely,
really?
Yeah. And I didn't, when I was home in Dublin, I'd started the book a bit, and I knew it was going to be in one of the close to one of the Goldfield towns, because I needed to be in a country area, because people would react to the family in a different way in a smaller population than if they landed in, the city. There wouldn't be as much attention. But we drove around, and we went to Bendigo and Ballarat, and they were I really love both of those. They're almost cities, but they were too big for what I wanted. And then one April afternoon, we drove into Castlemaine, and it was really warm, golden light, and we drove around, and I just felt, this is it. This is where they will live. They'll be here. And just the architecture is so unusual in Castlemaine. There's an Art Deco theatre. There's a sort of market building that looks like it's from Greece. There's fantastic sandstone buildings, Gothic churches, just the whole. There was so much to describe. So it was great. It was really. I thought, yeah, this is it.
That
It's where
sounds.
they're going to live.
As you talk about that, that sounds exactly like the passage when Nina first sees the town when she drives in.
Well, and that's
the first
complete.
time.
That's me. That was my own reaction to the town, very much, because Nina is from the outside as well, so she comes there, and that was great. It's completely what she sees is what I felt that day we arrived, and. It was, as it turned out, like I did a lot of research into the gold rush. The book's not a historical book by any means, but I needed to know, what little segments and snippets I'd use from the history, so that because the family do these guided tours about the gold rush in the house, so I needed to know what bits to pop in. So I learned a little more about the gold rush than I expected.
But it's one of the joys of being a novelist is it's like a job for people who never really decided what job they want to do.
Yeah.
Because you decide, well, I'm going to be a gold rush, I'm going to be a film location scout today, or I'm going to get involved in the history of the gold rush, or I'm going to, understand something else that's not your natural life. It's
Completely,
so
yeah.
you get to choose what your characters do, and you can research on that basis.
It's like playing with really big live dolls, isn't it? Yeah, it's just fantastic. There's something about it being a secret that you get to play, God and a theatre director and a film director in so many ways. Except it's so much easier than being a film director. You don't have to go on location. You just sit. You can do it anywhere. This is my 8th book, and I'm in the middle of my 9th, and I still love it. I still marvel at what is possible, because you can do anything with a book. You can, if I decide to send my characters in the next book to Mars, I can do it. With one sentence, I can do it.
So in this book, we have the world of a private school, the psychological effects of stage fright, the ins and outs of Australian cricket, junior Australian cricket, the history of the gold rush, the logistics of running a nanny training college, and I can't tell you how many other things. It's like a slice of every life that you wanted to live.
There's even yabbies in there.
Yes, that's right, there are yabbies.
Which my American editor had a lot of trouble getting her head around. She goes, "They're what? And you catch them where? Yabbies and stuff." And I actually had to send her a link with a drawing of a yabbie on it. So she thought that's just disgusting.
So what do you do? I mean, they're very cosmopolitan books. It seems that you see the world very much as a whole world, the way you've lived in different countries, and you have family in different places. So part of the book is in Australia and part of it's in England, and there's a character in America, and that seems to be quite a normal, and there's a European trip as well. That's a normal part of your worldview. But how do people like your American editor deal with all those things?
They actually really like it, I think. There's often a sort of a thought about American readers, for example, that they're very insular, and I haven't found that at all. I did a book tour in America 2 years ago, and in fact, that's where 2 of the locations came from. I was in Chicago, and then I was in a small town called Woodstock, which actually, if anyone's seen Groundhog Day, it's the setting of Groundhog Day. It's beautiful. Looks like a picture postcard American small town, which is in there too. So that's another good thing about being a writer. Anywhere you go is a possible location. And in fact, the American readers were really, really interested in reading about lots of different countries. And the world's so small now. I think it's not even a matter of if you travel, whether you travel physically, but you travel via the internet. You travel via movies and films and pop videos even, that there's a curiosity about the whole world, and it's easy to travel these days. So it's not science fiction that I'm writing. People do live in those different parts of the world, and I really like it because it just throws, because I really like to write about family dynamics, and I usually like to do something that pulls the whole family apart and sort of scatters them to all 4 winds, and then I like to bring them back as much as I can. So I like it when they're coming from different directions.
Yeah, well, reunions are also very, very featured in your work, and it's so fascinating to see a family that has been so close when they were all young. They've all gone on a different trajectory in their adult life with different careers and choices, and then bringing them all back. And watching those traits that maybe we just hinted at when they were young suddenly become full-blown. That must be an enormous amount of fun to write.
Oh, it's brilliant. And it's And I actually was almost surprised with this one because you meet the whole family when the Templetons, Gracie's 11 when you meet her in part 1, and her 2 older sisters, Charlotte's a kind of a bossy, dramatic sister, and she's 17, and then there's Audrey who's 15, and Spencer, the youngest brother. And you meet them as children, and then the story jumps about 15 years, and so they're all adults, and you find out what's happened. And I really, really enjoyed writing that because, because I'm 45 now, so I know lots of people who, when they were kids, they're now adults, and so I couldn't have written the books I'm writing now when I was 30, for example, because I wouldn't have grown up and seen. My nieces and nephews, for example, as children growing up to be adults, which is what the situation is now. And it must be, I don't have children, but it must be amazing for parents to see their personality form, in the baby, and then you see them as adults. And, I see that all the time in my own family and with friends' children. And I wanted to do that with this book, are you set in stone, your personality traits as a child, do they change into adulthood? And in real life, I don't think they do, and so in fiction, it was just great to, the bossy one as a child, the bossy one as an adult. So, but then it's also everybody in the book is buffeted and changed by the things that happen to them because of one of the bad consequences of these 2 families coming together. And I really wanted to play with that, the psychological, not always damage, but impact of major events, and whether that steers you off course into adulthood.
But the gap is so effective as well, because it's not just a constant narrative between age 11 and age 28. There is this hole in the middle, and that gives, for me, that seems like it gives the reader space to engage their own imagination and join the dots a little bit, so it becomes more of an active process where the reader is very much involved in wondering what happened in those interval years as well.
Oh, thanks, Toni. That's great. That's how it felt, because that was the deliberate thing of it as well. The other thing was, because I really love writing lots and lots of scenes of all the characters through the years. That's how I get to know my characters. So in part 1, which is now, I think it's about 200 pages long, my original manuscript, that went for about 500 pages because I had the whole family in Templeton Hall running all these tours, and I was having so much fun. I was having day after day after day, and then another thing happened and another thing happened, and I would quite happily have written in full detail everything that happened over the 20 years, but the book, it needs a crane as it is, it would be this big, and so it was almost like it was a decision to think, all right, I'll stop it at this dramatic point when there's a separation of sorts. And what I used, and this won't give anything away when you're reading it, but I used letters and emails and other sorts of communication to jump through 10 years as a way of just picking up the highlights of people's lives. And it worked. I was really delighted when I came across that as a device, without getting too technical about it, because all the information's there, but I didn't. It meant the publisher didn't have to chop down another 5 forests for the intervening chapters, and just to still get the information across. And then what happens in the final part of the book is all the holes are filled in, and things that were hinted at in those letters are explained.
Perfectly judged, may I say.
Thank you very much.
Also, the thing that I find the most remarkable about your work is the amount of compassion you have for your characters. So even when people behave in the most disastrous fashion, no spoilers here today, but Nina, Cal, you somehow present these people so that we can understand their very human foibles, and we have sympathy for the way they've become the people that they are. I mean, how do you manage that? How do you manage to have us all see the best of somebody even when they're not behaving at their best?
I think the answer in terms of how I get there is the enormous amount of backstory I write, which doesn't necessarily end up in the book. So I write for each character. I write their whole life story, and I'm friends with other writers, and I'm sure you might do it differently, Toni. That you might just imagine it, and you just come onto the page. Okay, I only need to know them at this point. I write lots and lots and lots of scenes with all my characters, which I'll eventually edit out, but it means I know them really well, and I don't write 100,000 word biographies of each of them, but I put them in situations. I write them into situations. And with Nina, for example, pardon me, who is who does make some catastrophic decisions which have bad consequences for other people in her life. But I stand by what she did because I felt like I understood. She had very sad things happen to her, and she's damaged from that, and she's making decisions based on those things that happened to her. And I know I've made decisions based purely on emotional reactions, not intelligent ones. Who hasn't? And I think if you explain why someone's done something, it doesn't make it right, but you understand. And so it's me understanding my characters before I write them, which then gives me the freedom to allow them to make bad mistakes, because there's the reasoning behind it.
And that's what gives the book so much emotional complexity. So there's no black and white answer. There's no this person's the villain, this person's the not. You can understand where everyone comes from.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I read a horrifying thing about you on the net that I have to just tell you, ladies and gentlemen. At the beginning stages of the book, I write 2,000 words a day minimum, and I try to write one book a year. My head hurts just thinking about that, Monica, 2,000 words a day minimum. How do you structure your day? What's your normal writing life like?
I don't have a social life. I don't go out. That's why I get so excited to be on tour, because it's real people. And I get to step outside the door. I'm quite serious. And I think that's why I also had to have that break between, because I had written 7 books in about 8 or 9 years, and I just needed to set foot in the outside world again, really. Because I really love the whole writing process, but I just was spending too much time in my own head, and I needed to meet, some living, breathing human beings. But I find 2,000 words a day, that is exactly how I start. And because I do write great big books, and I'm not calling my own books great there, by the way, I'm in terms of the size. Well, just a really quick story. Our dad, died 10 years ago, and he was really very self-deprecating, and his favourite hymn was "How Great Thou Art," and he didn't want to have that played at the funeral in case everybody thought that he was talking about himself. So whenever I say the word great, it triggers that memory. I write big books with lots of pages and lots of characters and spanning lots of years, and it's brick by brick by brick is how I build them. I write them as you read them. I start at the start, and I follow it all the way through. And the only way for me to do that is to set myself those goals, 2,000 words a day, and I start from, I'm really disciplined. I start at 8:30. I won't leave until I've written those 2,000 words. And then there's always a point, usually about 3 months into the writing, where the word count button, which I'm sure you're obsessive about it. Yeah. And then it doesn't matter anymore, and I'm down there, and I might write 10,000 words. I might edit those out, but it's laying those foundations, and just that works for me, just to, bit by bit to build it up.
But the beginning stage before you even start writing is very much a thinking and planning.
Completely, yeah. And that's about 6 months, and I'm lucky. I always get the idea about halfway through each book for the next one, and it's a funny time because my head's full of the Templetons at the moment, and I imagine it like I keep sort of waving around at my forehead, but it's like there's sort of a film playing in my head of what the Templetons is all about, or a stage or something. And it's like there's this whole cast on the edge of the thing, can we come on yet? And I'm going, no, not yet. I'll be with you in a minute, But and it's like that. So it feels like the next ones are ready to go. They'll be there soon. And I really like that. I like that feeling.
I'm also astonished by your work history. Is it true that you were a scriptwriter for Humphrey B. Bear?
People laugh, and it's not funny because Humphrey B. Bear doesn't speak. So when people hear that I was Humphrey's scriptwriter, and the other awful part of that story is that I was Humphrey's wardrobe girl, and Humphrey doesn't wear pants.
So you're in charge of the tie in that division, were you?
But I used to laugh because my first 3 books were really very much romantic comedies before I tilted completely into the family side of things, and I always think that Humphrey was the original strong silent type. So he was the perfect role model for my early heroes. So.
I've also got you were a PR consultant, a grape picker, a cleaner, a kinder gym instructor,
How has this all fed into you becoming a novelist?
I think I just did the research back to front. It's fantastic because I have done so many jobs and that has stood me in good stead, I think, in terms of, I've lived in lots of places and moved around a lot. So now when I'm, working out what each of my characters, what jobs they do and where they live, I've been able to use, lots of things that I did myself. Like I was, worked as a waitress, a hotel cleaner, the hotel cleaner that went into the Alphabet Sisters. The waitressing and working in restaurants fed into Spin the Bottle. I really like staying in B&Bs, so that went into Spin the Bottle as well. Travelling, so the travel agent. So I'm able to use lots of parts of my working life in the books, and it was great. I've been hanging out to use the Here's Humphrey stuff, and I finally got into this one. There's children's television in this one.
There is children's television in this one, a sock sort of thing. I don't know what it is. A sock animal?
It's a puppet.
Yeah, well, thank you. You've also worked a lot in publishing in different kinds of roles. That must give you a unique perspective on the role you have now when you've actually worked in other areas in publishing.
Side. Yeah, I'm like poacher turned gamekeeper.
Yeah,
I think.
That's right.
I worked for 10 years in Australia and in Ireland as a book publicist and book marketing and book researcher and all sorts of aspects of the publishing process. And absolutely, it helps. What drew me into working in publishing was the fact that I'm a big reader and have been since I was a child, and been writing since I was a child as well. And I think that's why I really wanted to work in publishing, to sort of, the closest I could get to a creative industry. And, secretly, I was about 23 until I was about 32 that I worked in publishing. And it actually wasn't until I left working in day-to-day with publishers that I found the freedom and maybe even the confidence to start writing fiction myself. But those 10 years, it was like doing a writing course by osmosis, I say, because I worked with authors including Roald Dahl, Tim Winton, Edna O'Brien, the Irish writer, fantastic kids writers, poets, every genre and every nationality. And I'd hear them talk, I'd come to talks like this with them. And so I heard so many aspects of what it's like, and it made me very clear that it's all about imagination. It starts with the idea. It starts with, the glimmer of something, or the touch of a plot, or whatever might be your starting point. But it's a job. It involves sitting down every day and writing, and that there will be days when that doesn't come easy and days when it flows, and they're the magical days. And so I went into it realistically, I think. Not that I pay any attention to that now. There's still days when I'm despairing. And I don't pull on all the memories that I have. But it gave me a real insight into it's about sitting down in front of that blank page or that blank screen. It's you have to work at it. It's the ideas, but it's what you do with the ideas after, and that's what keeps me going, I think, knowing that. And also now, 8 books down the track, I know that process too.
But your first book was written and entered in a competition where you won a publishing contract. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, my very first book I actually wrote when I was 8.
Oh.
And I've told this story, but if you don't mind, I'll tell it again. This is at home in the Clare Valley, and my teacher at school said a project, would we write a book? And I was delighted about this because I was a big reader, and I thought, fantastic, I get to have a go at it. And she said, and I do remember saying, write what you know. So my dad was a railway station master in Clare. I was from a big family. We knew a family called the Smiths. So I put all that together. And I wrote on yellow A4 paper, which I turned on its side. I can remember it. And I did the drawings, and I wrote the script like a picture book. And it's about a family that leave from Adelaide, a big family called the Smiths, and they catch a train to Perth. But the problem was I was only 8 and I'd never been to Perth, so I had no idea what it looked like. So they just hung around the station, and then they just come back. And after hours of deliberation, I chose my title, which was The Smith Family Go to Perth on the Train. And I've since realised, of course, you don't have to sum up the entire plot in the title. But that was my actual first book, and a beautiful thing happened to me with that book. My school librarian, I took it in to show her on the Monday, and she covered the book and in that plastic laminate, and she catalogued it, and she put it on the shelves of my school library. So for the rest of the time that I was at school, I had a book on the shelves of the library. And of course I was the only one that ever borrowed it. Every week. I'd sit in the quadrangle, oh, this is fantastic. It just gets better and better every time you read it. But that planted the seed for me.
That was your actual first book.
Yeah.
So, but the first book that you...
A grown-up book,
yes.
Sorry, Toni. Yeah, I did. I had left working in publishing, and John, my husband, and I moved down to Hobart in 1996, and there wasn't any publishing houses down there. But that turned out to be the best thing for me. Because I was away from talking about books and writers and all day, I missed it. Like, it was almost like a physical feeling. I missed that. And one night I borrowed the laptop I was working as a PR writer, and brought the laptop home, and I had this idea for a short story. And I sat down and I wrote it in about 20 minutes, I reckon. And I couldn't believe what it felt like. It was just this most amazing feeling. I thought, I've written a story. And the next day at work, I picked up a magazine, and it had at the back one of those twist in the tail, the 850-word stories. And at the bottom it said, we invite readers' contributions to the stories. I thought, right, I'll write another one. That night I went home and I wrote another short story. And the night after, another one. And it was like a dam burst. It was like all these years of being with other authors and writing and what have you had all been saving up. And in the space of about the next 3 months, I wrote, I reckon, 50 short stories and started sending them off hoping that they'd get published.
Wow.
Which is always a kind of a nightmare, because to send a story off to try and get published, you have to enclose a stamped self-addressed envelope. So when you come home and the post is there, with your own handwriting on it, it means it's a rejection. So you feel like you've rejected yourself. It's quite a strange thing. But looking back now, I realised that was my audition process. That's how I found my own voice as a writer, because the first one I wrote, it was like a dark kind of story that it's through you think it's a prisoner. And it's a person, bemoaning their crimes and describing this dark room and a light only coming in, and angry about their captors. And the twist was it's a 4-year-old kid who's been bowled and sent to his room. So that was the twist. And I sent it off, and apparently that is the most common story idea. Like, it's like that one and the one where somebody doesn't want to go to school, and at the end it turns out it's the headmaster is the second most common short story that editors get. But at the time I didn't know that. I wrote one which I remember writing a lot about clouds, and that was my attempt at literary fiction, and that got rejected. I wrote science fiction one, Back That Came. And so I kept sending them out, and back they'd come, and I was like an air traffic controller. I had a table that like a piece of paper table that I kept, okay, that one's gone off to that magazine, and it's just come back from that magazine, so I'll send it off to something else. Because I'd read in a writer's guide, always have another one ready to go, so your hopes are always high. So I had them shooting all around Australia. And then in a really short space of time, 3 of them got accepted. And they were all, had loads of dialogue in them, family settings, and lots of humour, and a twist in the tale. And it was almost like it was this invisible panel of judges saying, that's your voice, that's what works when you write. And that's what I still write about. So I'm really grateful for all those people that rejected me, and now that I've taken the pins out of the voodoo dolls, because that's how I learned what felt right to me. And they did, and in fact those 3 stories were what gave me the confidence to start a novel, and that was A Taste for It, my first novel.
And that was the one that you...
Sorry, you've asked me that question, and I keep going, taking a scenic route to the answer. Sorry.
Because a very common question that we get in these kind of panels is often we have emerging writers in the audience, and they all want to know, how did you get your first book published?
I promise I will answer it this time. Sorry. What happened was I had worked on this novel, and again using what I know, I wrote about it was a woman who runs a winery cafe in the Clare Valley, and she goes to Ireland on a food and wine trade trip, because I grew up in the Clare Valley and I'd been living in Ireland and back and forth, so I knew the 2 countries really well. And I'd been working on it for about 18 months, I suppose, at work, before work, after work, and showing only my sister Maura, whose name I borrowed for the heroine. And we had great fun. I'd send her off chapters, and she'd say, "Oh, great, what happens next?" So I had this, it was like a little reading group writer group between us, and the day I finished it, I came into work and I had an email from a friend of mine in Dublin who knew I'd been working on a book, and she said, listen, I just read about this writer bestseller competition that an Irish publisher, an Irish newspaper is running. why don't you think about entering it? So she got me the guidelines, and that was, and I fitted it in terms of the genre that they wanted and everything. So I sent it off from Hobart to Dublin, and I've got a photograph of me in the front of our house with it in the box.
That's a bit psychic, isn't it?
Yeah, it was funny. I just sort of had this, I thought, well, no, it's my first book, I'm sending it to somebody. I thought I wanted to kind of mark it. And then I took it up to Hobart, North Hobart Post Office, and it cost $87 to post. I've still got the receipt. I've still got that. And I was so protective of it. I actually waited around the corner from the post office until the van came and got it. So I waited for that. Then I got a letter back saying, that's great. We've received it, but there's hundreds of entries, and it'll be about 3 months before we can let anybody know what's happened. In the meantime, the Irish pub in Hobart was running a halfway to St Patrick's Day Guinness promotion, winner trip to Dublin. And cut a long story short, I won that competition. So that happened maybe a fortnight after I'd sent the book off. My husband's from Dublin, so his whole family are there. So we thought, this is great, we can go back and see them. And but it meant I wasn't going to be at home. So I just sent a fax to the Irish publisher. I knew it would still be, 6 weeks or so or more till I heard back. Say, look, I'm actually going to be away. Here's the contact details. And I gave my sister's fax number in Adelaide as the contact. So off we went on this trip that I'd won in this Guinness competition. And we arrived in Dublin, and we got to my husband's mum and dad's house, literally just in the door. Suitcase is still there, the kettle's been put on, and the phone rang. And it was my sister who's here, ringing to say that it was a Sunday in Adelaide, and she'd just got a fax from Dublin letting me know that I'd come runner-up in this writer bestseller competition. And they were offering me a 3-book deal and world rights. And so it was just unbelievable. Like, I remember making this sound that I'm sure only the dogs in the neighbourhood could hear. Because it was like, you look for the signs that you're on the right track. Because, as you mentioned, I've worked in lots and lots and lots of different jobs before. And, I was 32 or 33 when this happened. And it was like, this is extraordinary. I've won a competition, and it all kind of came together like that. And that's how it started for me. So that was my first publisher.
Wow.
So this trip I'd won
how impressive.
Turned into, going to meet the publishers, getting an agent, all that turning suddenly from being a holiday that we'd won to being the start of my publishing career.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it was amazing.
But when you think about all those rejections that you had for all those short stories, it's a strange position to be a writer, because you have to be quite a sensitive person to intuit the feelings of other people and put them down on paper. At the other hand side, you have to have nerves of steel to withstand all these blows. Did they affect you at all, those rejections?
Oh, completely. Yeah, at the time they did. But I think they really stood me in good stead. I mean, in terms of getting bad reviews, you never quite get over that, and I'm sure, you like me, you want to hunt them down. But you have to take it on board. If you take on board any kind of good, good coverage, you have to also believe that somebody is, everybody's got a right to an opinion, and I might not necessarily agree with them. And in fact, those rejections with the short stories helped me with the editing process of each of my books, because I realised, you can't write the perfect book in the first go. And sometimes I always think of editors as being like midwives to help us. Their job is to help us make the very best creation that we can. Rejections, I don't like them at the time, who does? But I think if after a day or two has passed, you think, okay, well, what was wrong? Something was wrong. It wasn't quite right. And the same way to editorial remarks, I would think, yeah, okay, I'll look at that again. You just have to kind of jump outside your sensitive person, I think, and get some more skin. So
what is that editing process actually like? You have an editor there or here, or?
I've actually got 3 editors.
Wow.
And it's quite unusual, and it works for me. I don't think it would work for some writers and things. And in the old days, before email, I used to print off 3 copies of my finished manuscript, and I'd send it to my editor in Dublin, my editor in London, and my editor in Melbourne. and they would all get it, and then I would get 3 sets of comments back, and that still happens now, but I send it by email. So it's just amazing. You know, it's always an incredible moment, actually, and I always have to make quite a moment of it. I don't just press send on the thing. I sort of have to, okay, this is the book I've been working on for 2 years, and send it to, and it goes to New York, it goes to London, and it goes to Melbourne, all at the same time. And I just find that incredible. I press send and off it goes. And then there's usually kind of a nerve-wracking couple of days, but I'm lucky my publishers get back really quick. They understand that you're a bag of nerves, and I get 3 sets of editorial comments back, and sometimes they can completely contradict each other. And I found that very hard with the first couple of books, that one would say, I didn't get a feel for the landscape. And then the other one would say, I could see and smell and taste every single thing you described. But what I do is I send everybody's to everybody, so they all know. And then I go and take it on board myself and think, okay, what do I think? So it's not books by committee by any means, because it's always my book, and I can say no to any changes. But if I give enough time between the moment I press that send, that magical moment where off it goes, to a chance to take some steps back from it, you need that. You need that feedback. I always liken it actually to being a painter, because I write, there's all not the Bruegel ones, because my characters aren't kind of as wild looking as the Bruegel characters. But if I write it's like I'm painting a huge, great big canvas, and it's got loads and loads of detail, and it's got lots of landscape, and it's got lots of action going on, and loads of colour, and everything I can put into it. Drama in one corner and comedy in another. Just this great big busy canvas. Then the day I send it off, the moment I press send, my nose is touching the paint. I've been so close to it for so many years, and over the next kind of days and weeks, what I have to do is take a step back and back and back and back from that huge canvas. And that's when I see, with the help of my editors, that corner there needs a bit more colour, or no, there's too many characters in this section of the canvas. And once I started thinking about it in that way, I actually find the editorial process really helpful. I think that they're helping me see that the picture's as perfect as we can make it, as I can make it. So I really enjoy the editorial process now.
That's terrific. That's because you've done so many books and they've all been so well received. That's fantastic. It's a vote of confidence in your editors as well.
I think so too. Yeah. You need them. You really need them. I think it's a worry if anybody thinks that they've written it, here it is and it's perfect, because it just doesn't happen like that. I'm sure you know exactly what I mean.
Do you ever get the problem that people that like sisters say, for example, think that they're in your book, think that you've actually put them in?
Completely. And if my sister wasn't here, I'd say, because I do put them in. Absolutely. But in surprising ways, actually. I mean, I always say that my books are emotionally autobiographical, and they completely are. Like it's all I've experienced as being part of a big family. I'm the middle of the 7, so I've had older sisters and brothers and younger sisters and brothers, and like every family, we've had heartache and great times and all of that. So I write the feelings that I've experienced in my own family. I don't take exact characters, I don't think, but I do. I have a fantastic set of nieces and nephews, and there's a couple of my nieces help me with Gracie. I can see that. So even as I'm giving you this answer, I'm contradicting myself, aren't I? But not in any particular way would I use it like a brother or sister or anything like that. But I have certainly had friends say, "That's me," and I read it and go, "Which bit is you?" And they go, "That one that did that." And I've had to say, look, it's really not. And a couple of times it actually hasn't been. It genuinely hasn't been. But then I kind of think, oh, that's good. They're relating to it. And a couple of times it's been quite uncanny, actually. Like there's been couple of the books were particular family dramas, those Faraday Girls. And without realising it, one of my friends read it and she said, this is actually what happened in my family. And she hadn't told me. Wow. So that was quite strange. Yeah. It was almost like channeled it through her or something. But I actually quite like that because it means somebody's relating to a character. I think that would be hard about writing science fiction or fantasy, that, I don't know anybody that suddenly sprouts wings or anything like that. You know, I like to...
Orcs in your life?
No, not so far. I do live in a pretty wild part of Dublin, though. So I actually think that's a good thing if people can recognise bits of themselves, but try not to use real people.